Delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal
The
privilege.
delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House, there's been a lot of talk on the floor this session and in the media about bills that never got hearings in committee or got to the floor. But I don't want to talk about abortion or constitutional amendments this morning, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk about Virginia's red flag law. HB, it's 1394, I think, Mr. Speaker, would repeal that red flag law. And I don't have any illusions that it got bottled up in committee because anyone on the other side of the aisle actually wants to save that law, Mr. Speaker. I've been working for years without any success to try to make this a bipartisan issue, like it is in other states that have red flag laws, like it is at the federal level. But I know here in Virginia, Republicans are solidly against it, some even offended by it. No, we all know that HB 1394 wasn't heard in committee or brought to the floor, Mr. Speaker, because this is an election year. And the Republicans in this body know that Virginians, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, all recognize the importance of the red flag law, and they support it. It gets bipartisan and, I might add, wide geographical support, Mr. Speaker. And what do I mean by wide geographical support? Well, the state police keep a database on the use of the law all around the Commonwealth. And that data show that since it went into effect in July of 2020, the law has been used hundreds of times. And not just in the blue parts of the state, but all around the state, including rural, red, Second Amendment sanctuary parts of the state. Scott County, Floyd County, Franklin County, Bedford, Culpeper, Bristol, Salem, Roanoke, Botetourt, Tazewell. The list, Mr. Speaker, goes on and on. Over 500 times, in fact. Since this law went into effect, Mr. Speaker, over 500 risk orders have been entered by Virginia judges. And these are judges who found, based on evidence presented to them in court, that someone posed a risk to themselves or to others. And while we don't get much data from the state police as to the circumstances of these orders, every once in a while the media covers them. Last December, for instance, Mr. Speaker, the media covered the fact that the sheriff in Front Royal, which I think is in your district, Mr. Speaker, the sheriff sought and the judge granted a risk order when a man who had received a poor performance review at work threatened his coworkers at his local Walmart, saying that he would turn their Walmart, quote, into the next Chesapeake. That was just 2 days, Mr. Speaker, after the Chesapeake Walmart shooting. And the media covered another story of a risk order entered last April in Warren County, which I think is also in your district, Mr. Speaker, when the Commonwealth of Warren County...
Coincidentally.
Go
ahead.
The Commonwealth's attorney there went to court because a man had posted videos of himself, Mr. Speaker, holding an AR-style rifle and directly and specifically threatened the Strasburg Police Department, saying that he would come to Strasburg to, quote, take back what was his, and that the police couldn't stop him and he would, quote, take them all on. And he included a video of a man shooting another man in the head at point-blank range. The court's order, Mr. Speaker, allowed the police to confiscate that man's concealed handgun permit, his AR, and his Kel-Tec PF 9mm pistol with laser sighting. Is there anyone in this chamber or watching or listening to what's happening today who thinks that these men, in these circumstances, at those moments in time, should have had access to a firearm? Now, some of you will say, I'm sure, well, we'll never know that something bad would have happened. We'll never know whether the red flag law prevented a tragedy. I say, thank God we'll never know, Mr. Speaker, because one thing we do know is that no tragedies happened on those days in Front Royal or Strasburg. One thing we do know is that these judges' orders on those days eliminated the risk that those men so clearly posed. They eliminated the risk that any more Walmart employees or any Strasburg police officers would die on those days. And here's more about what we do know, Mr. Speaker. The Wall Street Journal, hardly a liberal rag, has reported on a team of researchers from 8 universities studying red flag laws in 6 states. They found that 9.5% of the risk orders issued involved threats of mass shootings. And what I'm about to say is nothing short of terrifying, Mr. Speaker. 21% of those threats were targeted at K through 12 schools. You do the math, and that's more than 130 threats to our kids' schools across 6 states. Now, Mr. Speaker, Virginia wasn't included in that particular research because our bill is too new, but there's no reason to believe that our experience is going to be any different from these other states. The research shows very clearly that red flag laws have, in the words of the researchers, real preventive impact. So for the life of me, Mr. Speaker, I cannot figure out why the majority would want to repeal this law. Yet every member on the Republican side of the aisle last year voted to repeal it. I can figure out why you didn't want to vote on it this year. Because this isn't about the 500 people who had risk orders entered against them. This is about their families, who saw the risk of their loved one committing suicide go down, or their coworkers, or mall goers, or moviegoers, or churchgoers, or school kids, all of whom saw their risk of dying in a tragedy go down. Mr. Speaker, risk orders make us all safer, and voters know that. And with the incessant and seemingly accelerating tragedies we endure as a nation, and too often right here in Virginia, Virginians need and want to feel safer, to be safer. And this election year, of course, would have been a terrible time for Virginia Republicans to remind voters that they want to go backwards on making us all safer. And finally, Mr. Speaker, one thing I want Virginians to understand is the opportunity that the Youngkin administration is passing up to make our red flag law even more effective. The federal bipartisan gun safety law that passed last year, Mr. Speaker, has money in it for states which have red flag laws to improve their laws, to make them even more effective, to better inform and train law enforcement on how to use these laws, and to better inform citizens about the existence of the law and how to access the process when they're concerned a loved one may harm themselves or someone else. So that we don't have to wake up the morning after one of these tragedies, Mr. Speaker, with the additional pain of learning that somebody knew something but didn't do anything, which is just what happened in Parkland, just what happened in Highland Park, and happens in so many of these other awful tragedies. Mr. Speaker, I've written our Department of Criminal Justice Services and spoken directly to Director Miller. The administration has no plans, none, to use any of the federal money available to us to broaden and strengthen the use of our red flag law. No plans to help avoid more Walmarts, to help avoid more Strasburgs. Mr. Speaker, this is a terrible, terrible, perhaps even tragic missed opportunity. The governor's most important responsibility is to protect Virginians. He talks a good game of wanting to make Virginia the best place to live, work, and raise a family. The red flag law contributes to all 3 of those worthy goals. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that Governor Youngkin will have the political courage to recognize that his decision is a mistake, correct it, and help keep Virginians safe by helping them use our red flag law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.